That night, under a pickup in a wooded apartment complex, a bobcat lay trembling, fur falling out from mange, her back legs dragging like they weren't hers anymore, eyes wide with the kind of fear you don't forget. Neighbors formed a half circle with phones in their hands, talking about danger and calling animal control. But the most frightening thing wasn't her claws, it was the clock. Because if they arrived first, this story might have ended right there in the parking lot. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. And hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The cold that night didn't just sit on the street, it pressed down on it. The parking lot at Cedar Ridge Commons was washed in a dull amber glow from the streetlights, the kind that makes every shadow look deeper than it is. Dale Mercer had just shut the bay door on his little garage across town, hands still smelling faintly of motor oil and winter air, when he heard it, a thin scraping sound under his pickup. Not loud, not dramatic, more like the soft complaint of metal brushing stone. Then stopping, then starting again, like something was trying to move without the strength to finish the thought. He crouched, knees creaking, breath turning white in front of his face. The asphalt was wet and dark, holding the sharp scent of antifreeze and old leaves. At first he saw only darkness under the chassis, then a flicker, two eyes catching the light and throwing it back. They weren't bright with anger. They were glassy, exhausted, and fixed on him as if he were the last thing between the animal and whatever had been chasing it. A bobcat, full grown, not a kitten, too long in the body, too heavy in the shoulders, even in this broken state. Her coat was rough and patchy, clinging in uneven tufts, the skin beneath irritated and scabbed in places that made Dale's stomach tighten. Mange, he thought, the word landing heavy in his mind. She tried to pull herself backward, but her hind legs didn't follow the command. They dragged, helpless, scraping the ground with a sound that felt wrong to hear from a living thing. "Easy," Dale said without thinking, the way you talk to any scared creature, even when you know it can't understand the words. He kept his hands visible, palms open, and didn't reach. He'd seen what panic does to animals. He'd also seen what one bad choice does to a person's life. He was the one in the neighborhood who always reminded folks to read the fine print. Auto insurance, homeowner's insurance, the little clauses you ignore until the day you need them. Tonight, none of that mattered. This wasn't paperwork. This was breath and pain and time running out. A door opened somewhere behind him, then another. Footsteps, muffled voices. Someone's dog barked once and was pulled back inside. A woman in a fleece jacket stood at a distance, phone held up, screen glowing pale blue. "Is it gonna attack?" she called, half fear and half fascination. Another neighbor muttered about liability, about calling the office, about how animal control should handle it. Dale didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the bobcat's chest, watching the rise and fall. It was fast. Too fast. He dialed the wildlife rescue line he'd saved months ago after a coyote incident near the dumpsters. The phone felt icy against his ear. "I've got a bobcat under my truck," he said, voice low. "She's in bad shape. She can't use her back legs. She's shaking." The dispatcher asked questions, location, condition, whether anyone had tried to touch her. Dale said no. He didn't mention how the neighbors were closing in like a slow tide. He didn't mention the way the bobcat's eyes kept slipping shut for a beat too long, then opening again as if she was forcing herself to stay awake. Behind him, the property manager's voice cut through the cold. "I'm calling animal control. We can't have this here." Dale heard the words and felt something hard form in his chest. Animal control wasn't evil. It was a system. And systems, when they show up too late, don't always have room for second chances. A car turned into the lot, headlights sweeping across the pavement. The bobcat flinched, and the movement sent a small tremor through her body. Dale watched her try to stand, watched her fail, watched her swallow the failure and go still again. In the glare, her whiskers looked frosted, and her breath came out in quick, faint puffs. The dispatcher came back on the line. "A field responder is en route," she said. "Please keep people back." Dale looked up at the crowd, at the phones, at the tight faces. He thought about how a simple night can become a story people tell for years, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with cruelty. Then he looked back under the truck at the bobcat who had nowhere else to go, and he realized the first battle wasn't with her claws. It was with the clock. The headlights that swept across the lot didn't just brighten the pavement, they sharpened it, every crack in. The asphalt, every wet leaf stuck to the curb, every face turned toward Dale's truck looked suddenly too clear. The bobcat's ears flattened. Her body tensed, the way a person tenses before bad news, and then the tension broke into a trembling that ran through her ribs. A man stepped out of the car and paused for half a second, taking in the crowd, the phones, the distance people kept, as if fear were contagious. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a dull green jacket with a small patch that read Wildlife Response. His name was Mark Reynolds. He didn't stride in like a hero. He moved the way experienced people move, quiet, measured, like he was trying not to add one more sharp sound to a night already full of them. "Folks," Mark said, voice steady, not raised, "I need everyone back behind the sidewalk. Give her air, give her space." Someone protested about safety. Someone else said the words legal liability, like they'd been waiting all day to use them. The property manager spoke again, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Animal control is on the way. We can't risk a bite. We can't risk a personal injury situation." Mark nodded once, as if he'd heard the same sentence 100 times. "I understand," he said, "but she's not here to pick a fight. She's here because she's failing." Dale watched Mark kneel, slow and careful, the cold soaking into his jeans. Mark didn't look directly into the bobcat's eyes at first. He studied the angle of her spine, the way her hind legs lay wrong, dragging, unresponsive. The smell under the truck was a mix of damp rubber and something sour-sweet that made Dale think of infection. Mark's face tightened, just slightly, the way it does when a truth lands. "We're going to get you out," Mark murmured, not for the crowd, not for the camera phones, just for the animal. Then to Dale, quietly, "Has anyone touched her?" "No," Dale said, "just watched." "Good. Keep it that way." Mark turned and spoke again, this time to everyone. "Please stop filming up close. I know people mean well, but the lights and voices can push an injured animal into panic. And panic is how accidents happen." The property manager bristled. "If something goes wrong, who's responsible? Our homeowner's insurance isn't going to love this." Mark didn't argue. He kept his tone polite, the kind you use when you've learned that shouting never wins. Not really. "If you want to talk insurance claims later, we can," he said. "Right now, we're talking about keeping a living creature from freezing to death under a truck." He slid a thick blanket across the pavement, inch by inch, the fabric whispering against the ground. Then he positioned a humane trap, not a flashy contraption, just practical, worn, the kind of gear you'd trust the way you trust a good mechanic or a reliable 24/7 emergency service. The bobcat's breathing sped up as the trap edge neared her. Her claws scratched weakly, a dry sound like sandpaper on wood. "Easy," Mark said again, softer. "Easy." It took patience and angles, and one moment where the bobcat lurched in a burst of fear and the crowd gasped as if they'd just watched a car skid on ice. Mark didn't flinch. He shifted his weight, guided her forward with the blanket. And when the trapdoor finally clicked shut, the sound was small but final. The bobcat threw herself once against the metal, then twice. The whole trap rattled, echoing in the cold. A woman near the front whispered, "See? That's why we called animal control." Someone else muttered something about calling a personal injury attorney if anybody got hurt, half joking, half not. Then the bobcat's body went strangely still. Mark's hand froze on the handle. "Back up," he said sharply, the first edge in his voice all night. The bobcat's sides fluttered, her jaw tightened. A brief, unsettling tremor ran through her like a flicker of bad wiring. "She's crashing," Mark said. Dale felt his throat go dry. The parking lot seemed to tilt, the street lights suddenly too bright, too harsh. Mark didn't hesitate. He lifted the trap with controlled urgency and headed for his vehicle. "I'm not waiting for animal control," he told the property manager over his shoulder. "You can call whoever you need to call. I'm taking her to North Valley Wildlife Clinic now." And as Mark drove away, taillights bleeding red into the dark, Dale stood in the cold air and realized that tonight wasn't going to end with a simple story. It was going to become a decision people would argue about, unless the bobcat stopped breathing before anyone got the chance. North Valley Wildlife Clinic sat just off a darker stretch of road, where the streetlights thinned out and the trees closed in like a quiet audience. By the time Mark pulled in, the night had turned sharper, colder at the edges, the kind of cold that sneaks under your collar and settles on your skin like a warning. The building's front windows glowed a soft, steady white, and for a moment that light felt like the only gentle thing left in the world. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the clean bite of disinfectant and something faintly metallic, sterile, controlled, nothing like the damp asphalt under Dale's truck. A tech met Mark at the door, moving fast without making it frantic. Wheels squeaked as a gurney rolled out. The humane trap rattled again as Mark set it down, the bobcat's eyes flashing once in the bright light, then drifting, as if the effort of staying awake cost more than she had. "Adult female," Mark said, voice clipped now, all business. "Severe mange, dehydration, hind limb paralysis, at least partially." She tremored in the trap. Dr. Priya Patel appeared from the back hallway, hair pulled tight, sleeves already pushed up like she'd been in the middle of something else that couldn't wait. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't speak in inspirational quotes. She looked at the bobcat the way a good doctor looks at any patient, with focus, with respect, with the steady honesty that older folks recognize right away. "Let's get her stabilized first," Dr. Patel said. "Warmth, fluids, pain control, then we'll see what we're dealing with." The bobcat, Hazel, Mark had decided, because her coat, even in ruins, held hints of warm brown beneath the scabs, was moved into a quiet treatment room. The lights there were lower, more forgiving. A heat pad hummed softly under a towel. An IV line was prepared with a calm efficiency that reminded Mark of his EMT days, when every second mattered and nobody wasted words. Hazel's breathing was still too fast. Her body felt light in a way that made the nurses exchange quick glances. Nina, the rehab tech, kept her hands gentle, steady, the way you hold a fragile cup you don't want to drop. Hazel tried to lift her head, then let it fall back. A small sound escaped her throat, half hiss, half plea, and it scraped across the room like a match struck in the dark. "Easy," Mark said again, but this time the word felt thin. Dr. Patel ran her fingertips along Hazel's spine, not pressing hard, just reading the body's story. Hazel flinched. Her front paws flexed. Her back legs didn't answer. "We need imaging," Dr. Patel said. "X-ray first, possibly a CT if we suspect spinal trauma." Mark nodded, and for a moment he thought about the costs that never make it into feel-good stories. The kind of bills that add up fast: specialty care, imaging, rehab. In human life, you hear it every day. Medical bills, legal liability, auto insurance premiums. Even the talk of disability insurance when a back injury changes everything. People argue about it online. They compare rates. They call a personal injury attorney when something goes wrong. But here, in this room, those words felt like noise. Hazel didn't have paperwork. She had pain. The X-ray room was colder. The machine made a low, mechanical whir. Hazel was sedated enough to keep her from tearing at anyone, but not so deep that it felt unsafe. Even so, Mark watched the rise and fall of her chest like a man counting his own breaths. Dr. Patel studied the first images on the screen, the black and white shape stark and unforgiving. Her face didn't change much, but Mark saw the slight tightening at the corner of her mouth. She took another image, then another. "This looks like an old injury that's been aggravated," she said finally. "Spinal involvement, likely nerve damage, could be from a vehicle strike or a hard fall." Mark swallowed. In the hallway, he could hear the faint buzz of a fluorescent light, the distant click of a door closing, the soft murmur of staff doing what they do when lives are on the line. It all sounded too normal for what was happening. "Can she recover?" he asked. Dr. Patel didn't rush the answer. She looked at Hazel, then back at the scan. "We can treat the mange. We can rehydrate her. We can manage pain and start physical therapy if she tolerates it," she said. "But if the nerve damage doesn't improve, she may never run fast enough to hunt. And a bobcat that can't hunt doesn't survive in the wild." The sentence sat in the air like a weight. Nina stepped closer, her eyes soft. "She's fighting," Nina said quietly. "Even like this." Mark stared through the glass at Hazel's body, small and still under the towel, ears flattened even in sleep. In the amber streetlight outside, the world had looked harsh. Here, under the clinic's white glow, the truth looked clinical, no less brutal, just cleaner. Dr. Patel placed a form on the counter. "We can continue with aggressive treatment," she said, "but I want you to understand what that means. It's not just medicine. It's time. It's rehab. It's setbacks. It's stress for her and for everyone involved." Mark picked up the pen. The paper felt smooth under his fingers, almost slick, and he could hear the scratch of ink as he signed. In that simple sound, he heard a promise. Because if Hazel was going to have any chance at all, it would start here, under bright lights, with hard truths, and with the kind of patience you don't get credit for online. And somewhere back at Cedar Ridge Commons, Dale was probably still standing by his truck, staring at the empty space under the chassis, wondering if the night had already decided how this story would end. When Hazel woke, it wasn't the kind of waking that comes with relief. It was the kind that comes with suspicion. The first thing Mark noticed was her eyes. In the clinic's softer light, they looked less like glass and more like a storm cloud, alert, watchful, ready to split open at the slightest wrong move. Her body was warmer now, clean towels tucked around her, a low hum of heat beneath the bedding. The mange treatment had begun, the IV fluids had done their quiet work, and the worst of the shaking had eased. But fear doesn't drain out of a body the way dehydration does. Fear stays. It waits. Hazel tested her space the way a trapped thing tests a cage. A slow shift of weight, a careful stretch of her front paws. Then a sudden lunge that made the kennel door rattle with a sharp metallic clack. The sound echoed down the hallway and bounced back, too loud for a building devoted to calm. Nina approached first because Nina had the hands for this, steady, respectful, never quick. She didn't lean in. She didn't speak in a cheerful voice. She simply moved with the patience of someone who's helped injured bodies relearn themselves. Hazel answered with a low growl, deeper than her size suggested, the kind of sound that vibrates in your chest even from a few feet away. Her ears flattened, her lip lifted just enough to show teeth. Not a threat for show, a warning meant to be believed. "Okay," Nina whispered. "Okay, I hear you." It became clear fast that Hazel had rules, and those rules were written in pain. If someone stepped into her line of sight while food was present, she wouldn't touch it. The bowl could sit there untouched for hours, the smell of warmed meat turning faint and stale, until the room was empty again. Only then, when the door shut, when the footsteps faded, when the air felt still, would Hazel lean forward and eat in quick, guarded bites. Mark watched it on the monitor later, the grainy camera view showing a creature who had learned that being seen could mean being hurt. Physical therapy was worse. Dr. Patel wanted gentle range of motion work, just enough to keep joints from stiffening, just enough to give nerves a chance to wake up. Nina tried with a towel under Hazel's belly, supporting her weight. Hazel exploded into motion the moment she felt hands on her, even gentle ones. She snarled and twisted, claws scraping against the rubber mat. The wood sound like chalk dragged across a sidewalk. Her heart rate spiked so quickly, the monitor beeped in sharp, impatient bursts. Mark stood behind the glass and felt his own shoulders tighten. In his EMT years, he'd seen men with spinal injuries flinch at the lightest touch, their faces going gray from pain that never showed up on an X-ray. Hazel had no words for that kind of suffering. She only had instinct, and instinct told her to fight. After the second attempt, Nina backed away, breathing slowly through her nose, the way people do when they're trying not to pass their stress to someone else. "She's associating contact with trauma," Nina said. "If we push, we'll lose her." Dr. Patel nodded. "Then we don't push, we adjust." Outside the clinic walls, the world kept doing what it does, turning compassion into debate. The property manager at Cedar Ridge Commons sent an email to Mark's organization with the subject line in all caps, "Safety concern." Another message, followed about legal exposure, about whether this incident could affect their insurance rates, about what would happen if the bobcat came back and someone got scratched. It was the kind of worry older Americans understand. You work hard, you protect what you have, you don't want one unexpected event to turn into an expensive mistake. Then came the social media clip. A neighbor had posted a short video of Hazel in the trap, cut so tight and timed so carefully it made her look like nothing but rage. Just the moment of rattling metal, just the flash of teeth, none of the trembling, none of the stillness afterward. The caption used words like danger and attack. The comments filled with people who'd never been within 10 feet of a wild animal, telling everyone what should be done. Mark stared at the screen in the staff room, the blue light washing over his hands, and felt something sour rise in his throat. A story could be twisted in seconds. A life could be reduced to a headline. And once fear got a foothold, it spread faster than truth. Dale called that evening, his voice low, embarrassed. "I didn't post anything," he said, "but it's going around. Folks are saying you're keeping a wildcat in town." Mark looked through the hallway window at Hazel. She lay curled in the corner, ears angled toward every sound, eyes half open, never fully sleeping. The clinic lights made her remaining fur look the color of old pennies, warm, dull, and scraped thin. "She's not a wildcat in town," Mark said quietly. "She's a patient." But even as he said it, he knew the pressure would keep building. Wildlife cases didn't just involve medicine. They involved people, fearful people, protective people, people worried about bills, people who called lawyers and made insurance claims because that's how they survived their own storms. Hazel couldn't defend herself in those conversations. She could only defend herself the one way she knew, by building a wall so high nobody could touch her, nobody could help her, nobody could get close enough to hurt her again. And the hardest part was this: if that wall never came down, all the medicine in the world wouldn't be enough. The clinic sounded different after midnight. In the daytime, there were voices, doors opening and closing, the soft rhythm of work. At night, it was mostly the low drone of the heating system and the occasional click of a thermostat, tiny noises that felt louder because everything else had gone still. The hall lights were dimmed to a warm beige glow, and the air carried that familiar mix of disinfectant and clean laundry, like a hospital trying to stay gentle. Mark had just finished logging Hazel's meds when the first sound hit, one sharp thud, then another, as if something heavy had bumped the outside door. For a second he thought it was the wind. Then the alarm screamed. It wasn't a polite beep. It was a full, piercing wail that cut straight through the building and into your bones. Red lights blinked over the doorway. Somewhere in the back, a metal shelf rattled as if the whole clinic had flinched. Mark's heart jumped the way it used to on ambulance calls. No time to think, only to move. "Warehouse side," Nina called from the corridor, her voice tight. They ran toward the storage area where food and supplies were kept. The security keypad flashed. The alarm monitoring panel blinked warnings. Mark had recommended a better home security system months ago for the clinic, something with smarter motion sensors and a reliable smart security camera feed, because rural buildings attract trouble. Bored kids, curious wildlife, and sometimes people looking for an easy theft. Tonight, it wasn't kids. A shadow darted near the cracked service door. A raccoon, big and bold, or maybe a lean stray dog. Mark couldn't tell at first in the strobing red light. It was digging at a bag of food, claws or nails scraping on. Concrete with a dry, frantic sound. The smell of torn packaging filled the air, sharp and oily. Mark lunged forward and clapped once, loud. "Hey, out!" The animal bolted, knocking over a bucket. Plastic clattered across the floor. The service door swung wider, letting in a rush of night air that smelled like wet pine and frozen dirt. Mark shoved it shut and threw the deadbolt, hands working fast. He could already hear the clinic's guard calling in through a walkie-talkie, asking if they needed an emergency locksmith, asking if they should call local authorities, asking about liability. All of it mattered: insurance, an insurance claim, damage reports, everything people worry about when a building gets breached. But Hazel mattered more, because Hazel had heard the alarm. By the time Mark reached her wing, the sound had already done its damage. Hazel slammed her body against the kennel door again and again, metal banging like a hammer on a hollow pipe. Her eyes were wide, pure, panic reflecting the flashing lights like broken glass. She tried to stand, and her back legs folded. She tried again, and the effort turned into a scraping drag that made Mark's stomach knot. "Hazel, no," Mark said, voice low, trying to pour calm into the air. "You're safe. You're safe." But the alarm kept wailing, relentless. Hazel threw herself sideways, claws skittering on the rubber mat, breathing fast enough to whistle. Nina reached for the control panel in the hallway, fingers trembling just slightly as she punched codes. The alarm finally cut off, and the silence afterward was almost worse. Thick, ringing, like your ears trying to recover. Hazel didn't stop right away. She kept staring at the door as if expecting the world to break in again. Then she sagged into the corner, chest heaving, and Mark saw it. A small tremor in her hindquarters, the same angry reminder of injury that had brought her here in the first place. Dr. Patel came in, hair undone, face still calm, but eyes sharp. She checked Hazel's breathing, listened, watched, and then looked at Mark as if weighing the cost of this setback. "She's regressed," Nina whispered. Not blaming, just stating the truth. Mark felt the guilt rise, hot and useless. He thought of that edited clip online, the fear it fed, the pressure from Cedar Ridge Commons. He thought of how quickly the world can turn a fragile recovery into a spectacle. And he looked at Hazel, small, shaking, cornered in her own mind, and understood something that didn't feel good to admit. All his effort, all his careful planning, all his experience, none of it mattered if Hazel never believed she was safe. That night, Mark didn't make another attempt to get closer. He didn't reach in. He didn't ask for trust. He simply stayed nearby in the quiet, listening to her breathing slow, and he began to wonder if the only way forward was to stop trying so hard. After the alarm night, Mark stopped trying to win Hazel over with effort. He stopped hovering at the kennel door, stopped filling the air with soft promises that didn't reach her anyway. In the morning, the clinic looked the same. Clean floors, pale walls, a thin strip of winter sunlight on the hallway tiles. But Hazel looked different. Not louder, not fiercer, just sealed up, like a house with the lights off. So Mark changed one thing: himself. Every afternoon at the same hour, he pulled an old chair into the corridor where Hazel could see him without feeling cornered. He didn't bring treats. He didn't bring a plan. He brought a folded newspaper that smelled faintly of ink and coffee, and sometimes a worn paperback with a cracked spine. The chair legs made a soft scrape on the floor. He sat down. He opened the paper. He turned pages slowly, letting the sound be steady, harmless, predictable, paper whispering against paper, a small human rhythm. At first, Hazel watched like she was waiting for the trick. Her ears stayed, angled forward, listening for the slightest change in his breathing. Her eyes followed his hands, the way they moved with no urgency. Mark kept his voice inside his chest. He didn't speak to her. He didn't look directly at her. He simply existed in the same space and made no demands. Nina noticed the difference before anyone said it out loud. Hazel still wouldn't eat if a person stood too close, but she no longer slammed her body against the door every time footsteps passed. The tight, sour smell of fear in the kennel area faded a little, replaced by the cleaner scent of soap and fresh bedding. Dr. Patel adjusted the pain meds, kept the mange treatment consistent, and approved therapy in smaller pieces. Less touching, more support, more time. "We're building tolerance," Nina said, "not obedience." In the staff room, Mark overheard the kind of talk that lives in every adult's life. A co-worker worrying about rising insurance premiums. Another mentioning a relative's long-term care insurance and the cost of rehab after a fall. Someone else comparing retirement planning notes like it was a second job. Mark didn't join in. He understood it, though. People want control because the world can take it away fast. Hazel wanted control for the same reason. On the 9th day of reading, Hazel did something small that felt huge. She didn't retreat to the far corner when Mark sat down. She stayed where she was, shoulders low, watching. Mark turned another page, slow enough to hear the gentle crackle. The winter light in the hallway warmed to a soft gold, and Hazel's remaining fur caught it, showing the faint cinnamon color beneath the rough patches. On the 12th day, Nina opened the kennel door just enough to slide in fresh water, and Hazel didn't strike at the gap. Her body trembled once, then settled, and then came the afternoon that changed the air. Mark had the paper open to a simple story. Nothing dramatic, just everyday life. He felt Hazel's gaze without meeting it. He waited until his hands were steady, until his breathing was slow. Then he lowered the paper and rested it on his knee. Without leaning forward, without crossing the invisible line, he extended his hand into the open space, palm down, fingers relaxed. The hallway went quiet in a way that felt alive. Hazel didn't move at first. Her eyes narrowed, measuring distance, memory, risk. Mark held still long enough that his shoulder began to ache, but he didn't shift. He didn't flinch. He let the moment belong to her. One step, a pause. Another step, softer, like a shadow. Mark could hear her breathing now, thin, careful. Hazel's nose hovered inches from his knuckles. He felt the faintest brush of whiskers, a touch so light it could have been imagined. Then, instead of teeth, he felt fur. Hazel pressed the side of her face against his hand just once, as if testing whether the world would punish her for it. A low sound rose from her throat, not loud, not pretty, but real. Something between a purr and a broken motor starting up. Mark didn't smile big. He didn't speak. He just let his eyes soften, and he kept his hand where it was, steady as paper turning. Because that wasn't a tame moment. It was a trust moment. And trust, once it shows up, changes what's possible next. For a few days after that first lean into Mark's hand, the clinic felt lighter. Not loud, not celebratory, just easier to breathe in. Hazel's coat began to show new growth in soft, uneven patches, like grass returning after a hard winter. The worst sores faded from angry red to dull pink, then to clean skin. Her eyes stayed wary, but the panic wasn't living in them the way it had before. Nina started calling it the window. A small stretch of time each day when Hazel would tolerate help without exploding. They kept everything consistent. Same hour, same quiet hallway, the same gentle pressure of a towel sling as Hazel practiced bearing weight. The rubber mat under her paws smelled faintly of soap. The room held the soft sound of breathing and the quiet click of Nina's stopwatch. Hazel's front half was strong. Her shoulders rolled with that wild, contained power bobcats carry like a secret. But her back legs, those were the truth that refused to be talked into changing. Some days she stood for 3 seconds, some days for 10. Once, she managed a few careful steps, nails tapping lightly on the mat like a hesitant drumbeat. Mark felt something warm rise in his chest, the kind of hope that makes you forget the cost of getting here. He thought of Dale, of that cold parking lot, of the way all of this began under a pickup truck. He wanted the story to end the way people like stories to end, with a gate opening and a wild animal disappearing into the trees. But good medicine isn't built on what people want. It's built on what is. Dr. Patel scheduled a reassessment and asked Mark to sit in on it. The exam room was brighter than the rehab wing, lit in a clean white that made every detail sharp. Hazel was calm enough now to be moved with minimal sedation, but her ears still flicked at every new sound, a clipboard shifting, a pen clicking, the distant hum of an air vent. Dr. Patel watched Hazel walk, if you could call it walking, across a short lane with soft footing. Hazel tried. She truly tried. She pushed forward with her front paws, shoulders working, head steady. Then her back end lagged, wobbling like a table with one leg shorter than the others. She caught herself, adjusted, and kept going, determined, proud, not knowing what it looked like from the outside. Nina wrote numbers down. Mark hated the numbers. Numbers never cared how hard someone fought. Dr. Patel set her hands on the counter and spoke the way doctors speak when they've already rehearsed the sentence in their minds. "She's improved," she said, "a lot, but she's not meeting release criteria." Mark stared at her. "Because of speed?" "Speed, stability, reaction," Dr. Patel said, ticking it off without cruelty. "A bobcat needs a burst. It needs to pivot. It needs to sprint, not just move. Out there, a second of hesitation is the difference between eating and starving, between escaping and being caught." Mark felt the old EMT part of him recognize the meaning. In human terms, it was like watching someone finish physical therapy, but still needing a cane on uneven ground. You could talk about independence all you wanted, but a winter sidewalk doesn't care. A hungry predator doesn't care either. Later that afternoon, Wildlife Officer Lauren Reed arrived for a formal evaluation. She was in her early 50s, hair tucked under a cap, posture straight in a way that suggested years of field work. She carried a clipboard and a calm authority that didn't need volume. Older Americans tend to recognize that kind of presence, the person who has seen enough to stay steady. Lauren watched, Hazel from behind the viewing glass. She asked about treatment, about behavior, about the edited video that had gone around online. Mark explained the setup, the reading routine, the gradual rehab. Lauren listened without interrupting, eyes narrowing slightly when she heard about Cedar Ridge Commons and the HOA pressure. Finally, she said, "The public thinks release is the only good ending, but release is only good if the animal can survive." Mark nodded, but the words still stung. "So what happens?" Lauren set her pen down. "Sanctuary placement is appropriate," she said. "A controlled environment, minimal human contact, space to climb, space to be what she is." Mark felt the room tighten. Sanctuary was safety, yes, but it was also an admission. The story wouldn't close with a clean, cinematic fade into the forest. Lauren flipped through the intake notes again, then paused. "One more thing," she said, voice quieter. "This file mentions a prior call." Mark frowned. "Prior?" Lauren tapped the page. "A report from a highway shoulder 2 weeks before your call. A bobcat seen near an on-ramp moving poorly, disappearing into brush. No capture, no follow-up." Mark's mouth went dry. The image hit him hard. Hazel, already injured, already sick, near fast traffic, headlights flashing, nowhere to hide. Not a single night emergency. A slow crisis. "She didn't just wander in yesterday," Mark said, more to himself than to anyone. Lauren held his gaze. "Sometimes they get pushed out of safer places," she said carefully. "Sometimes people panic. Sometimes they make choices they don't want their neighbors to see." Mark thought of those phones raised in the parking lot, the whispers, the email subject lines in all caps. He thought of how quickly fear turns into a demand for someone else to clean up the mess. He thought of the words people use when they feel cornered: insurance, liability, lawsuit, personal injury, like the vocabulary of survival in modern America. That evening, Mark sat in the hallway with his newspaper again, the pages smelling faintly of ink. Hazel watched him from her enclosure, eyes calmer now, but still wild. She would never be a pet. She would never belong in someone's home, no matter how good their intentions were. This wasn't about adopting. This was about responsibility. Mark folded the paper slowly. Outside, the sky was the color of steel, and the first flakes of a new snow began to drift past the window, soft and quiet as ash. Recovery had brought Hazel back to herself. Now came the part nobody liked talking about. The morning they moved Hazel to the sanctuary, the sky was the color of worn denim, and the air smelled like pine sap and cold metal. Snow sat in thin sheets along the edges of the road, not pretty and untouched, but packed down and gray where tires had passed. Mark drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the transport crate, as if his palm could lend her calm through plastic and wire. Hazel didn't thrash this time. She watched, her ears angled toward every sound, the way a violinist listens for a note that's slightly off. The crate shifted with each turn, giving a soft, hollow rattle. Mark could hear his own breath inside the cab, and he kept it even, the way you do when you're trying to keep a fragile moment from breaking. The sanctuary property was quieter than the clinic, set back behind a line of evergreens that held the wind. The main enclosure wasn't a cage. It was space. Rock ledges warmed by weak winter sun. A deadfall log angled like a bridge. Platforms at different heights. A shallow pool that reflected the sky in dull silver. The whole place smelled like damp bark and clean dirt, and it carried a hush that made you lower your voice without being asked. Lauren Reed met them at the gate. Nina was there too, hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes tired but bright. Dr. Patel stayed back at the clinic, but she'd sent a note folded into Mark's pocket, the kind of note doctors don't often write. Simple, human, proud. They slid the crate into the holding area and stepped away. Mark didn't crowd the door. He didn't make it about him. He only watched Hazel's silhouette through the mesh, shoulders low, tail still, body gathering itself. When the door opened, Hazel hesitated for a heartbeat that felt like a full minute. Then she moved forward. Her paws touched sanctuary ground, and she stopped again, breathing in. The air here was different, thick with trees and weather and distance. She took 2 more steps, and then, without warning, she climbed. Not fast, not graceful the way a healthy bobcat would, but with purpose. Front legs pulling, hind legs following with a slight wobble that made Mark's throat tighten. She reached the first ledge and turned her head, not toward the people exactly, but toward the sound of them. Mark stayed still. He'd learned something in these weeks that a lot of grown-ups learn the hard way. Love isn't always closeness. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's doing what's right and letting it look plain. That afternoon, Dale called. "I've got something you need to see," he said, voice quieter than usual. Dale had been careful since the edited video incident. He'd stopped posting. He'd stopped arguing in the HOA group chat. He'd done what older folks often do when drama turns ugly. He'd stepped back and focused on what he could control. But he'd also kept thinking about Hazel, kept replaying that first night in his mind, the eyes under his pickup, the way she couldn't run. "The manager finally let me talk to the security company," Dale said. "I asked for the camera feed from the parking lot. The smart security camera caught more than we saw." Mark drove back to Cedar Ridge Commons in the early evening when the streetlights came on again, that same dull amber. He met Dale in a small office that smelled like printer ink and stale coffee. A monitor sat on a desk, and the footage played with no sound, only a timestamp and the grainy view of winter. The video showed Dale's truck parked in its usual spot. Then, around midnight, a sedan rolled in slow, headlights off until the last second. It stopped near the curb. A door opened. A figure stepped out. Not a child. An adult, bundled in a dark coat, moving fast with the posture of someone who doesn't want to be recognized. The figure bent down near the truck, then stepped back into the car. The sedan pulled away, tail lights fading red down the lane. Mark's stomach went heavy. No dramatic shove, no obvious cruelty caught on camera. Just a decision made in the dark, and a living creature left to the cold, close enough to people to be found, far enough to be abandoned. Dale cleared his throat. "I don't know who it was," he said, "but that's what happened." Mark watched the footage again. He thought about panic, about people doing the wrong thing because they're scared of the right thing. He thought about all the words adults reach for when fear shows up: legal advice, liability, home insurance, auto insurance, even the talk of calling a personal injury attorney before anyone's been hurt. He understood the instinct to protect your own life. He just wished it didn't come at the cost of someone else's. Back at the sanctuary, the next morning was brighter. The sun showed up in thin slices through the trees. Hazel was on a higher platform now, her outline clean against the pale sky. She looked bigger out there, not because she'd gained weight, but because she had room to be what she was. When Mark walked the perimeter path, she didn't come running. She didn't call out. She simply paused, just for a moment, and held his direction in her gaze. That pause was enough. It meant the fear hadn't won. It meant the patience had landed somewhere inside her, like warmth stored in a Stone. Some stories don't end with a return to the wild. But dignity doesn't need applause. Sometimes the best ending is a quiet promise kept, day after day, when nobody is filming. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.